And welcome, Hoosier Nation, to our 95th episode of the Hoosier Sound, where we are the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in-depth analysis and coverage for Indiana University sports to as many fans as possible across a multitude of modern platforms. We are recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on Tuesday evening, July 2nd, 2019, where I'm your host, Noah Freeman. You can catch our live broadcast Tuesday evenings at 8:30 p.m. on our YouTube page or our website. If you happen to miss the live broadcast, you can subscribe to our show for free on whatever platforms you listen to podcasts, so you can listen on your own time. Check out our Twitter and Facebook at The Hoosier Sound and at Indiana HQ. Subscribe and turn the bell on so you don't miss an episode. All the information is in our website, indianahq.com. All right, Hoosier Nation, it is time for some sports talk. On the docket for tonight, we haven't really ever done a full episode on evaluating Archie Miller's tenure at Indiana thus far, so that's what our main focus is going to be this evening. As an overarching theme, basically, is Archie Miller right for the job after he has completed 2 seasons at Indiana University? Here with me tonight, the Kristen Press and Tobin Heath to my Alex Morgan are here with me as always, Matt and Nithin. Matt, how are you doing this evening after the U.S. women's national team makes it to the Women's World Cup finals for this 3rd straight tournament?
My heart rate was through the roof the entire game, especially in the 83rd minute when they decided to go to VAR and then give a penalty that I don't think should have been awarded in the first place. And then it doesn't matter because, of course, our wonderful goalkeeper saves it. And we don't have to worry about it. I'm kind of upset you didn't say I was Megan Rapinoe, but it's okay.
I had her on the list today until she didn't start and she was injured. So you can swap in Tobin Heath since Kristen Press scored the goal today. You can swap in Tobin Heath for Megan Rapinoe. I just had that in because she didn't play today and we were doing our current thing. Fine. But yeah, I've got my USA shirt on and everything. But Nithin, how are you after the Cubs had quite a game last night against Josh Bell and the Pirates?
Wow. Look, you know what? I'm already a bit wound up and fired up for this episode. I don't want to get pushed over the edge. But look, there are a lot of Cubs fans out here. Okay, I know they've had some recent success, but I know a lot of Cubs fans stick with the team even when they had decades upon decades of struggling. So a blowout loss here and there's not going to change much. Come on now.
I mean, and as a Pirates fan, doing maybe not as much losing, but basically a losing team most of the time, when you have a game like 18-5, you got to at least take some of it, especially when you got someone like Josh Bell that's just lighting up the entire league at the moment with 3 home runs last night. Anyway, let's get into our topic on evaluating Archie Miller and his tenure as the basketball coach for the Hoosiers. I'm going to start up by setting up the scene basically to where we are today in the summer of 2019. So wind back the clock all the way 2 years to at the beginning of March in 2017. Indiana turns down the NIT home game and loses their first NIT game to Georgia Tech. Then on March 16, 2017, Tom Crean was fired as the NCAA tournament tipped off. Right after that, James Blackman Jr., OG Anunoby, and Thomas Bryant all left for the NBA. And as, of course, we have seen recently, of course, OG and Thomas are still in the NBA and thriving. Archie was hired as the head coach for IU March 25th, 2017, 9 days after Crean was fired. 11, I can't count. Keep in mind, Archie and Tom Crean had 2 very, very different styles of coaching basketball. Roster. That upcoming year, Archie's first year, consisted of Josh Newkirk, Rob Johnson, Juwan Morgan, Freddie McSwain, Colin Hartman, an eventual injured Duron Davis, non-consistent Devontae Green, and then some freshman contributions from people like Allen Justin. Keep in mind, again, with that roster, as we have now graduated a few of those players, there are no current NBA players on that roster, which, if you don't have NBA talent, it's kind of hard to win. Yes, we have Rob and Juwan that are both in the Summer League at the moment, and Freddie across in Canada, but right now we got no one officially in the NBA that was on that roster that season. Second season of Archie Miller, all of the Romeo hype with senior Juwan Morgan after his breakout year. We've talked about this past season in depth a lot and the injuries that played a huge factor. Of course, didn't excuse everything. But in seeing that after Romeo played through a hand injury the entire season, on top of all of the other injuries we had, at some point, there's only so much any coach, no matter who it is, can do. Even the injuries they should have made, even with the injuries, should they have made the NCAA tournament? Probably, but as frustrating as it is, they still would have been better than the season prior by being 1 win away from the tournament, and they made the NIT as a number 1 seed. Not saying all of that is even okay, but as an improvement from the first season for Archie. Nathan, am I forgetting anything setting up the scene basically to where we are in the summer of 2019?
No, I think you set the scene pretty well. No, the one thing I do have to mention, though, and we're not going to get into the nitpicky details. You guys listening or watching this on YouTube can look them up. But Archie Miller, when he was brought on to be Indiana's head coach a couple of years ago, let's just say he was a handsomely paid leader for this basketball team. Let's just put it at that. I think that's part of the formula here. That's part of the discussion as we go forward. But outside of that, I think you really covered the most of the hiring and the roster situations.
Anything else, Matt?
Nope.
Awesome. So let's move into evaluating those first 2 seasons to where we are. We're going to, just to make it a little more organized, go offense, defense, some more of the intangibles, sprinkling in some stuff about basically is Archie doing the right stuff, or is he going to be a coach that's going to fail, or is he going to get better as the years start to progress? So let's start with offense. Matt, kick us off with just your overall thoughts before we get into a more detailed discussion on offense for Archie and how it's gone the first 2 seasons so far.
I don't think it's an understatement to say that the offense has been worse than the defense has, and the defense has been quite impressive. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the change from when I was a freshman in 2015 to now, the offense has taken a drastic drop. Of course, it was always going to drop when you lose Yogi Ferrell as your point guard. And, we've been missing a point guard for a while, and we just got that last year in Rob Finney. Josh Newkirk, love him, God bless him. Good luck in his playing career from now on. But he was not what we needed in his 2 years here at IU. But I think without a point guard the first year, the offense was in shambles. Kind of hard to run an Archie Miller based offense when you don't have somebody who is a primary distributor. And then last year, I believe it was a combination of injuries and guys maybe not developing the way they wanted them to. Not going to name names, but I think it was just they had a rough patch, and the offense was decent. We beat a team like Marquette. We blew them out. We blew them out of Assembly Hall. We went to Michigan State, a team that is known for their defense and rebounding, and out-rebounded them and outscored them and outplayed them in both games that we played. So I think the offense has been up and down. I think it's been slightly disappointing, and I do believe that that's probably where they're going to go with this next assistant coaching hire. But that's, yet again, a story for another day.
What are your thoughts, Nathan, after the stuff Matt just talked about?
So I agree that the offense has been subpar. That's for sure. But what are you going to get? Look, you're going to get that kind of situation when you have not only a coaching change, but a complete systematic overhaul of what IU basketball was doing. Matt, you pointed it out. There was a drastic difference between what you saw in the Crean era and what you're seeing now with Archie Miller. Mm-hmm. Crean's game was all about running up and down the floor, athleticism, getting to spots, hitting threes, and going to the free throw line. Archie Miller is drastically different. And look, whether or not you agree or disagree with the system, the fact is it's very clear and very obvious what his plan is for an offense. It's get the ball inside. If they collapse, kick it out, try to get an open jump shot. It's not the fastest offense in the world. Honestly, I think next year is going to be a breakout year for this offense. What you've seen the first 2 years was a product of a major system change and what you saw the last 2 years was a situation where the depth was severely lacking. And if you're not even focusing on depth, how about you look at the starters? Romeo Langford just went through the draft process and has repeatedly mentioned that he had a wrist injury that affected his game. At the end of the day, that's not really something Archie Miller can be held accountable for. He had to play the hand that he was dealt. I think next year, when IU's got guys like Trace Jackson Davis, a 5-star, he might be a 4-star recruit in some databases, coming in to play forward and joining an incoming transfer in Joey Brunk, healthy guys like Deron Davis and Race Thompson, I think you're going to see IU more efficiently produce on offense. 2-pointers. They hit 30% of their 3-pointers. Guys, I'd rather hit half my 2s on a daily basis or a game-by-game basis than 30% of my 3s. That's just math. So at the end of it, like, all in all, it comes down to whether you have the personnel and you have guys who are committed to the system. And I think next year, Archie's going to have those guys in the front court.
Yeah, exactly.
But when I was looking at how the offense was doing, I'm not saying that the offense can't work with the guys he's bringing in. I'm just saying as an overall, the last 2 seasons, it's been disappointing. And not even, I think it was mistaken, not even just compared to Tom Crean's offense, is because Tom Crean is an offensive-minded coach, and you can't really expect a defensive-minded coach to have just as good of an offensive system as Archie does, or as Tom Crean does. But I do believe that it has underwhelmed me to a certain point, and they haven't gotten players in positions that I thought would make them not just most comfortable, but that they would succeed in. I think Romeo, they could have run a lot more pick and rolls with him last year, something that he showed more promise in, and that worked in the offense well. I think having Juwan Morgan out at the 3-point line, as much as I wanted to see him shoot 3 to get him a better NBA prospects, I believe that he should have been down in the post more than he was. And I also believe that Justin Smith was sometimes misused. So I think there's room for improvement, and I think they learned a lot of those, how to cure a lot of those mistakes later on in the season after the losing streak.
Yeah, I think Archie's, especially with the offense, this is where his lack of high caliber Power 5 conference coaching comes into play. He hasn't had much of that level of coaching experience, and he's learned a lot these past couple of years, and he's going to learn a lot of the, storied franchise type of coaches that have come through college basketball. A lot of them had that head coaching experience before. Archie Miller hasn't had as much coaching experience as everyone else, so he's still learning because he's such a young coach. So I think the learning curve is something on offense that he's especially getting used to at this big of a stage, because defense is his thing. That's where he's most comfortable with. I'm going to read numbers in a little while, just how he's been turning the defense already around and how it's just going to keep improving. But I think offense, to Matt's point, is going to keep getting better as he learns on the job, just like he learns a lot of the intangibles with rotations, in-game changes, just all of that kind of stuff that we're also going to talk about later. In terms of his offense at Dayton per se, since that's most of what we can go off of on how he's done in higher Division I head coaching, his offense would surprise you actually a little more. His offense wasn't as bad as it seems at IU right now, and of course, Archie knows that there's a lot of stuff that needs to get taken care of. But at Dayton, let's just look at the KenPom adjusted efficiency rankings that he had during Dayton. And then I'm also going to go to the team's rankings, just overall offensive efficiency, not adjusted. But starting with KenPom adjusted efficiency, the season before Archie got to Dayton, they were 137th in the country. His first season, now, of course, all of these statistics anywhere that we're going to talk about, a lot of it has due to circumstance. So there's a lot of varying circumstances. But his first season at Dayton for KenPom adjusted efficiency, they were 29th. Second season, 28th, 37th. Then it dipped down to 75 and 143 later in his Dayton tenure, but then back down to 53. So in terms of adjusted efficiency at Dayton, he was actually pretty high. Now at Indiana, his first 2 seasons, Tom Crean, right as his final season, had IU at 29th. Then Archie, the last 2 years, was 92nd and 82nd. So he's got room to grow, obviously, as he starts to get used to his players and just his type of player, but the skill level being much higher than they were at Dayton. I think it's going to start getting better. And this past season wasn't worse than the first season. If you go to the overall efficiency rankings from team rankings, right before Archie got to Dayton, the team rankings was Dayton was 196th overall for efficiency. His very first year, he got him down to 44th, then 43rd, then 63rd. Then he had those 2 rough years at 99th and 169th, then 77th. And even in some of those offensive years, he's still making it to the NCAA tournament after he got used to the program. So Archie isn't a bad offensive coach. So it's not like he had troubles and struggles the first 2 seasons that they're going to continue, and that IU basketball under Archie Miller is never going to be good. But they're never going to be bad, or at least I don't think they're going to continue to be bad. I think he obviously has a lot of room to grow, but he's going to keep improving and keep growing. Do either of you have comments on some of those numbers I read?
Yeah, I think one thing you said there, Noah, was pretty interesting. Look, according to KenPom last year, they were 82nd in the country in adjusted offense. If you asked a casual a devoted IU fan, he or she may have said they were like 200th in the country in offense. If you kind of hear some of the banter going around, at the end of the year, it looked like things were it looked like they hit a wall. But at the end of the day, 82nd in the country is in the top third, or the top quarter of college basketball when it comes to offensive efficiency. And to me, that was on a team that had significant injury problems and was playing in the most brutal conference in basketball.
Yeah.
So going forward, look, in the past, we might disagree on some things. We might say that certain stuff was suboptimal. Frankly, I think it was a product of having guys that weren't fits in Archie's system. But going forward, especially remembering in the back of your minds that the 3-point line gets pushed back next year going forward, I think IU's offense will start hitting those top 50, top 40 metrics that you said his Dayton teams hit when he was over with the Flyers.
Yeah, and I don't think that necessarily, being in the 80s is a bad thing. I think it's actually probably a good thing to be in the 80s, especially in your second year. I just think the frustration with the offense is the fact that the shots weren't going down. I think shooting is an issue. I've heard fans and heard people on this podcast, me in particular, scream that we need shooters because the 3-point shooting that is now vital in college basketball was less than optimal last year. And I believe that the part of the frustration with the offense is that if their shots go in, I believe that we're much closer to the 50s range, even the 40s range that we've been talking about in offensive efficiency. If the shots go in, if we're shooting a decent percentage from 3 and we're shooting a decent percentage from the free throw line, also the wins and losses definitely start to reflect the better team that we were last year. I don't think that 19-16 record that we had last year is very flattering to how we played. I think we are a much better team than that record shows. It's hard to argue when you have like an 11-game losing streak or losing skid in the middle of the season. But I believe that our defense is much better than a team that should have lost 11 games in a row.
Well, and here's something interesting, Matt. You mentioned 3-point shooting. According to KenPom, in Division I, the frequency of 3-point attempts has gone up each of the last 6 seasons. Each year, teams are taking a higher percentage of 3-pointers than the previous year. With the 3-point line pushed back, how much do both of you think that percentage goes down? Last year in Division I, teams averaged 39% of their field goal attempts from 3. How much do you think that goes down next year?
I actually don't think it will go down by much. I don't think that the extra length on the 3-point line, the extra what they've added, I don't think it'll go down by too much.
I also think in terms of that, because that's a huge thing that we're also going to touch on more as it gets closer to the season. If Indiana, at least from the 3-point line, can stay in terms of official numbers, if they can stay consistent from last year, I think that's an improvement because they're shooting farther from beyond the arc, even if the numbers stay the same. Everyone is going to take a hit this next year in 3-point shooting. So if Indiana can stay consistent, I also think that's a win. So, and going down, of course, will contribute to the length of it. So I think 3-point shooting in terms of efficiency and percentages, that's going to be a question mark. I don't think that's going to be a make or break point from Archie this next year, just because everyone's going to be struggling with it.
Yeah, and to me it's well, I was just going to butt in there. To me, it's not really make or miss, right? It's going to, the guys you have on your team, certain guys are excellent 3-point shooters, certain guys aren't. But it's going to be very interesting to see the overall effect on the entire college basketball landscape to see that 3-point arc push back to 22 feet. Because if what your guy's saying is true and the number of attempts stay about the same, that should technically help a team like IU who focuses more on getting the ball closer to the basket.
Technically it should. But when it comes to player development, I know I see Coach in the chat talking about player development. By the way, join us live in the chat every Tuesday night and go give Coach and Rob some company in there. Anyways, look, when you're talking about player development, the key to player development is getting them, one, to be good college players, and two, if they have the talent, get them to the NBA. Because, look, some kids dream of playing college basketball, but most kids who play basketball dream of being in the NBA, especially now and kids growing up in this age. And so what are they doing in the summer? They're not shooting college threes. They're shooting NBA threes, which are even further out than the college three-pointer is, and it'll still be further out once they move it back 2 inches, which is to the international line. So I don't think that the increased length from the three-pointer is going to change at all, because these guys practice even longer three-pointers in the offseason if they're trying to make it to the NBA. So that's just my opinion.
So we'll get into this next season in terms of shooting, because that's a huge topic overall, not just for this specific episode. But in terms of one more thought of offense before we move on, since this is probably going to be a longer episode, I want to throw this in here now. This is also good and bad, but Archie, when I went to the Maryland game, I mentioned this on this podcast, if you listen to the post game of that specific game. But after I was at the Maryland game, the away game, and I walked by Archie talking to, I wasn't sure, I think it looked like a family member or friend or something, like 45 hours after the game was over. And this was, remember, about this time, this was the mid to end of January, right as soon as Rob Vinicius' presence was very much getting missed. And that was at the end of the Maryland game where Indiana couldn't close it out. All I heard, because I didn't want to stop and try and listen to the conversation as I was walking by, all I heard was Archie was just, man, I really need Rob back. Now, if that shows that Archie really has a specific person in mind of who he wants to have on the team and have running the offense, so he's got a vision and he's got an offensive perspective of what he wants to do. Now he needs to get better at making changes off the court and on the court. I think that's where he has to try and get better in terms of a lot of what he's going to do, but he doesn't know zero stuff, I guess, about the offense. So, yeah, let's move on to we have a new segment. We're going to start a new weekly segment called Social Media Shout Out. So it's basically what it sounds like, where we're going to give a shout out for an IU athlete from basically what they're saying on Twitter or Instagram. So we're going to give a shout out from their IU athlete Twitter or Instagram account. So Matt, why don't you give us your social media post of the week from some IU or former IU player?
So this week, our first one, it has to be Thomas Bryant, former IU basketball player, now Noah's favorite NBA team, the Washington Wizards center.
Now my favorite. It's always been my favorite.
Okay. Well, now plays. He was drafted by the Lakers, or picked up by the Lakers and drafted. He was picked up by the Lakers, then traded to Washington. He's gotten a big deal for them. I think it's 3 years, $25 million. Isn't that's right? Did I get that right? Yeah, 3 years, $25 million with the Washington Wizards to be their center, to play with Bradley Beal and John Wall when he comes back. So fingers crossed. Look, shout out Thomas Bryant. His Instagram handle is No Limit TB. That is No Limit TB in all lowercase. And then his Twitter handle is No Limit TB 31. So he makes it really easy. I'm glad we picked him as the first person, because I don't know what I'd do if he had a bunch of underscores in his name. Anyways, congrats to Thomas on 3 years, $25 million. I know the Wizards love him, and they snapped him up really quickly during free agency. So good for Thomas.
Yep.
Sorry about that, you guys. I think Mother Nature got in the way there for a few minutes. There's a wild thunderstorm going on outside that just began while we were podcasting, of course. It looked like you were talking about Thomas Bryant and some Twitter and Instagram stuff. What a great story, right? I mean, the guy, a couple years at IU, and now he's making it in the NBA.
Yep. Nathan went out for a second and came back in. So podcast listeners probably wouldn't have noticed the difference, but for the live audience, Matt, just going off your Twitter stuff, follow him on Instagram. His Instagram stories was great. He just posted pictures of everyone who had said congratulations to him, and it was awesome. And if you might as well go follow Thomas on Instagram and Twitter, you might as well go follow us. Instagram, indiana.hq. Plug that in there. Check it out. We got some great pictures, great stuff. Post articles there. Might as well just add 2 followers to that. Twitter @IndianHQ, just like normal. All right, let's move on to defense. Something that people feel a little more comfortable about with Archie Miller, even in his first 2 seasons. So, Nathan, let's just start with your quick overall thoughts on Archie and his defense.
So, for those that, I don't know how far broad we have to zoom out, but the system Archie Miller runs at Indiana is called a pack line defense. I'm sure that's a term that a lot of people have heard or caught up with, listening to different TV broadcasts and articles, reading articles and stuff like that. Essentially, the pack line defense is about the group moving as one, and they focus more on collapsing in the lane, which means that teams beat IU's defense by shooting 3-point jump shots and executing great offense. And as far as I can tell right now, IU is further along, as Matt said earlier, on the defensive side of the ball than the offensive side. But let's maybe tap the brakes for just a second. The team at the end of the year ranked in the top 40, I believe, as far as the Ken Pump defensive ratings go. I believe they were 35th in the country. 32nd, actually, was where they ended.
Nice.
A good number. But when you look at teams like Virginia, who play a similar type of defense, they're one of the top 5 defenses in basketball last year, and that's where they've been for a few years now. So that's the ceiling for this team. I'm not saying that's where it should have been last year or in Archie's first year, but that's how high it can go. I'm not sure if this offense can be a top 5 offense in the country, but the defense can get there. And last year, I think we saw generally players who were in year 2 of Archie Miller's system understanding the defense a little bit more. I think when you look at guys like Deron Davis and Al Durham, those were a couple of players that look like, okay, we've got some continuity. We've got a greater understanding of what Coach Miller wants us to do. So we're going to be in the right spots. We're going to be communicating more, and we're going to execute better in that fashion. But there were some players in their first year. I think you can look at Romeo Langford. I think you can look at Evan Fitzner, who was a senior, but he was in his first season at Indiana, who I think maybe had some difficulty adjusting to it. At the end of the day, ultimately, I think it's extremely important that IU has as much continuity and experience as possible in order to maximize what they can be defensively. And that might alter Archie's recruiting strategy. Maybe you shade away from some of those one-and-done guys. It's tough to pick up a system like this in 1 year and then, waltz on into the NBA. So now I think it's important to notice how these things kind of work hand in hand. All right, you got your offensive system, you got your defensive system. Now maybe we shape our recruiting strategy on our assistant coaching staff to get molded with that. So all in all, that's what I look at as far as defense goes. It was good last year. I think it can be great or even top 5 in the country within a couple of seasons.
Yeah, I liked your point, especially about how it's been good, but the ceiling is the best in the country. Not where it is now, but that's where it could potentially be, and that's where a lot of the statistics I'm about to give you is where the defense is at least starting to head in the right direction. And in terms of your continuity comment, you talk about basically the pack line being a defense that's not the most popular. It's not used specifically throughout the country as much as other defenses, but maybe another team like Syracuse and Jim Boeheim and their 2-3 zone. It's a defense that's different. Anyone can get put into 2-3 zone, but no one runs it as well as him just because he teaches it and he ingrains it and the players learn it from day one. Syracuse isn't a team that has a lot of one and done. Sometimes they've got 1 or 2 and dones almost, but they've got really good athletes, but they've got a great defense because Jim Boeheim instills it in everyone from day one, and that's what Archie's starting to do. Now, in terms of other specific pack line defenses, let's look at a few other teams and coaches and how they started versus where they basically ended. So same kind of thing, KenPom adjusted efficiency, and then the team rankings efficiency. Those are some of the kind of statistics I'm going to give you. So let's start with just Sean Miller, Archie Miller's brother at Arizona. So right before Sean Miller got there, right before KenPom 147. As soon as he got there, his first season, 108th. Second season, 67th. Then it got to 37th, 32nd, first in his 5th year. Third, it dipped down a little because Sean Miller hasn't had the best past couple of years, but started out right before he got there at 147 and went all the way down to 1 by the end of one of the seasons. Archie Miller at Dayton, season prior, 77th. Now, his first season was not great at all. It was 160th. I think it was a huge turnaround in terms of the players. But second season, 145, then third season, all the way down to 72nd. Fourth season, 30th, then down to 15th on his 5th season. So he went from 160th at his worst all the way down to 15th in just 3 to 4 years. So again, we're only 2 years into Archie. We still have more time. Tony Bennett, the guy the pack line defense that just won the national championship. So right before Tony Bennett got there, defense, KenPom adjusted efficiency was 70th. First season, 71st. Second season, 71st. Great. Third season, 5th. Fourth season, 25th. Then 4th, 2nd, 7th, 2nd, 1st, and 5th. And this is a guy that knows the pack line very well. So if you look at just Tony Bennett in general, I think that's the staple for the pack line defense as of now. Started at 70th. 71st in his first 2 seasons. Then a third season, which is kind of third and fourth season, is that big number for pack line defenses to make a humongous jump down. 5th, 4th, 2nd, 7th, 2nd, 1st, 5th. Top 5, top 10 for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out of the last 8 seasons, if I'm doing that right. So that's the ceiling, like Nathan said. Archie Miller in Indiana. Right before he got there, Tom Crean had it at 104th. His first season was 65th. His second season this past year was 32nd. He's already down to 32nd in his first 2 seasons, and he hasn't even, quote-unquote, had his breakout year. So we can see how the defense is obviously on the right path. I could go into the team rankings, the efficiency, but it's more of the same kind of thing. If you want to hammer it home a little more, Tony Bennett right before Virginia for his just overall efficiency right before he got there was 180. He got it down to 2nd. So same kind of stuff. Matt, why don't you talk about your defense, about what Nathan and I were saying previously?
Yeah, it's hard not to disagree with you guys. I think that the evidence is there, the stats is there. If you took the 2016 Tom Crean team and you took last year's team and you compared defensive tapes and their statistics, it's obvious the change in defensive culture. It's obvious what the change has been, even in just the system itself. And that's with people that are now only in their second season with this defensive system. It's going to improve next year. Like, I don't know how to convey it correctly other than the fact that if you look at every pack line team that has ever played, the more guys that they have on their team that have run the system for longer are always better than the teams that have guys that are just getting used to it. And I think you just went over that with those numbers. I have an article coming out eventually, and I mean, I swear it's coming out this time. And I think this is interesting that you brought this up about the 5th year of the other Miller brother, Sean Miller, at Arizona being number 1 in the country in defense. In my article, I talk about Archie Miller's 5th year as being the year that IU gets back to national relevancy. So look for that to come out. I talk about the next couple coming years, what you should expect, what we're looking at in recruits, and how I kind of think Archie Miller's planning out things. But I think the key is Robert Finney and his senior year being that point guard out there that's run the offense for 4 years or 3 years previously and been in the defense for 3 years previously. I think we're going to have a nationally praised defense coming up here in the next couple of years. Heck, maybe even next year we might have it, thanks to some people coming back. And that's another point I want to bring up. I think last year our defense could have been even better with people like Jerome Hunter being out on the floor more. I think we saw what Race Thompson can bring to the table the more he played later on in the season. Like, these are guys, these are 6'7", 6'8", long arm defenders that can switch. And that is really, really important in a pack line defense. Having these wings that can play defense and disrupt passing lanes by their length. So I'm really looking forward to seeing Jerome get on the floor next year. I'm really looking forward to seeing Race Thompson become a more important part of this team next year, because they're going to help out our defensive numbers drastically.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So evaluating the defense the past couple of years, I think everyone, even the most pessimistic IU fans, the most vocal fans, how they don't think Archie Miller's the right guy for the job. Very few people at least can try and argue that Archie Miller's defense has been a bright spot the last 2 years. Like we just said, from the Ken Palm ratings, from being 65th and the 32nd, right before it being over 100. That's the kind of stuff that gives you a lot of credit so that you can try and continue to build the team better. It gives you a little more time for the athletic director not to fire you.
Right,
and
yeah.
the type of projections that I just talked about, and Nathan and Matt talked about how even in the 3rd, if not 4th year, those defenses skyrocket all the way to one of the best in the nation. I think that even if Archie's offense continues to struggle the next couple of years, I think his defense is something that can at least get them back to an NCAA tournament type of level, just with the growth that they're starting to go through. And just, again, echoing a lot of what Matt said, the specific players and everything, it's something that we can start to look forward to. And if they're a top 5, top 10 type of defense, Archie's just got to try and figure out the offensive side, and then it's just almost nothing but good stuff. So this next year is going to be a huge indicator for the pack line defense specifically. I think next year, maybe not the program as a whole, but this next year I think is going to be a big year to look at where Archie's pack line defense starts to rank among the rest of the country.
And then, look, Matt's point when he said 5th year was he sort of national contention. Okay, I'm still firmly expecting this team, honestly, and maybe our listeners disagree. My expectation for this team next year is to make the NCAA tournament. And the reason for that is because when you look at the returning players, which again is so incredibly important when we talk about the pack line defense and what Archie Miller runs, you're talking about Demezy Anderson, year 2, Duron Davis in year 3 of being coached by Archie Miller, Al Durham, year 3. Devontae Green, again, same thing, 3rd year. Jerome Hunter is in his 2nd year, even though he hasn't played. Rob Finney in his 2nd season. Justin Smith in his 3rd. Race Thompson in his 3rd. This is the experience that I think can absolutely help push IU much higher than 35th in the country defensively. Top 20, top 15, maybe not number 1, 2, 3, 4, but that sort of improvement is something I absolutely expect to happen when you have that depth. When you can stay healthy, you can play more aggressively, and that's the kind of stuff I'm expecting to see next year. The schedule will get a little bit easier. The conference is a little bit lighter. Hopefully, you can be a little bit more healthy. This next year is a really big year for IU's basketball team.
Mm-hmm. And like Matt said, maybe not necessarily on a national level next year, but we're going to start to see some of those little things start to get to a national level. I think you can't get every aspect of your team to a nationally relevant, but let's hope that defense can be the first thing to start to get back to where people expect, hey, I use the top 10 defense every single year. Let's move on to who won the week. Nathan, who won the week this past week in IU sports?
Well, you guys talked about him in the social media segment. Thomas Bryant. I mean, let's not dance around the obvious here. The guy signed a big-time free agent contract with Washington. Let's not overlook some other Hoosiers as well. Noah Vonleh, earlier today, news came through that he signed a free agent deal with Minnesota. It's a couple of guys that, look, they may not have been the most fan favorite Hoosiers out there, but it's funny how some of those guys end up really succeeding in the NBA. So, Thomas Bryant, Noah Vonleh, hats off. Look, Vonleh looks like he's going to be a free agent again next year. So if he has a big year with the Timberwolves, it's crazy to think Vonleh's only 23 years old. I mean, he's been in the NBA now for multiple years. This is a guy who maybe could hit a payday next year if he has a good season.
Yep. And then also to mention Juwan Morgan last night in the first summer league game that the Utah Jazz were to play, and he did not play. He did not see time on the floor. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of these summer league teams are humongous, and some of the coaches will have multiple rotations. Like one game, these 5, 6, 7, 8 players will play. Then another game, the next 7, 8 players will play. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad. As we are recording at 9:15 p.m. currently on Tuesday evening, they're going through their second game. So we'll get to see if Juwan gets in tonight. So by the time most of you listen to this, you'll get to see how Juwan did last night or a few nights ago. But let's hope Juwan can get out there. Robert Johnson back on the Hawks. So let's see what kind of stuff he can do when the summer league kicks off in Vegas in a couple days. So a lot of great Hoosiers in the NBA talk. Hopefully we can keep seeing everyone go, and hopefully Romeo is actually going to be able to go as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Wait. Before you go on, did you see the picture of Romeo working today with the Celtics? He was working on a shooting release with a ping pong paddle and tape. I don't think I've ever seen that before. So that's interesting.
I did not see that. Maybe I need to go check that out.
Go check it out. It's definitely worth checking out. Interesting
It's
stuff.
pretty cool. Yeah. All right, let's get on to some of the intangibles and stuff about Archie Miller. Now, this is a topic that can go in different ways, so we're just going to keep this discussion a little short, but we can talk about things like impact with the fan base, some player development, assistant coach hires, which we have seen him obviously do when you obviously start your team, but then he's going to hire an assistant coach hopefully within the next week or so, recruiting and just our general confidence on him. So Nathan, why don't you pick a category and talk about one?
Where to begin? How about let's talk recruiting for just a minute here. Archie Miller was brought to Indiana for a few reasons. He was brought to bring some consistency to IU basketball. He was brought for some postseason success for IU. But I think one of the big reasons Archie was brought in to coach the Hoosiers was to improve in-state recruiting. And I think you're really seeing that more and more with Archie. He deserves a lot of credit in this facet alone. Trace Jackson Davis, an in-state kid, highly recruited, chose to come to Indiana. Obviously, last year, Romeo Langford, very competitive recruitment. He ends up choosing to play for the Hoosiers. And this is outside of what you guys end up thinking of that person as a player. It's still noteworthy that Archie Miller, especially as a very inexperienced coach at a Big Ten level, is able to go out and get these guys. And it's not just those two. He landed Robert Finney, a guy like Demezy Anderson. And don't forget, he landed in-state, essentially a transfer in Joey Brunk. He was a Southport High School grad, played at Butler, and now he's going to play for IU for a couple of seasons. So even if the recruiting rank itself isn't all that high, and that depends on kind of which recruiting site you use, it's very encouraging to see Archie hit on guys in the state. You're not going to get everybody. That's how Keon Brooks and guys like him pick other schools. You're not going to get every single guy you go for. But I still think he deserves a thumbs up for his in-state recruiting efforts.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
agree.
Yeah. Recruiting is a more or less an easier topic to discuss. I think Archie so far has shown that he can recruit, and he's had a guy like Ed Schilling help come and teach him the ropes. And now that he's gone, I think Archie can do a lot of it himself, that he's developing a lot of those relationships. So we're going to get into that specific topic a little bit later. But Matt, why don't you talk a little bit about player development and what you've seen from Archie thus far?
Sure. So as far as player development, I think you can look at players like Rob Finney and what he's done with him in his first year here, putting him in a position to succeed. I think Archie found his true point guard, and you can tell Archie was a former point guard by the way he puts Rob in positions to succeed. On the other hand, we've gotten a 5-star recruit in Romeo. This is Archie Miller's first 5-star recruit, and you could tell that I think Archie was feeling out how to correctly use Romeo, and I think it didn't help that Romeo wasn't able to shoot because of his thumb. It wasn't at 100%. So I think he just upped the difficulty meter a lot. I think it'll be interesting to see what he does with Trace Jackson Davis, a fringe 5-star recruit coming in this year, and how he changes that. I think we can judge more about his player development this year than we can about last year. I think what he did with Juwan was fantastic. When he came in, he changed Juwan and turned Juwan into a very productive player, who was honestly one of the better players to come through an IU program. So he's also shown that. So the jury's still out. I think he's done an okay job. I don't think he's done a great job. I don't think he's done a good enough job to get us some wins. But maybe this summer he puts in more work on shooting, and maybe this summer they get some more of the chemistry or whatever was plaguing them last year during that losing streak down packed for this season, and they're a little bit more consistent. We get in the tournament, and we can all go back to loving IU basketball again and not wanting to cry.
Yep.
As far as that goes, though, Matt. Well, I was just going to mention there, Noah. I feel like, and look, we've touched on a lot of Archie Miller's strengths earlier tonight. I think this is his biggest weakness, if you ask me, in all seriousness. From what I've seen so far, I honestly can't think of a vivid example off the top of my head. I know you mentioned Juwan Morgan, Matt. I can't think of any player really that got much better as the year went on. Now, Rob Finney started off great, right? But what are the big moments we remember? We remember his great shot against Butler. That came in the first half of the season. Do you guys think Robert Finney or even some other younger players, do you think they really improved as the year went on?
Did the Michigan State games just not happen? I'm sorry. Like I thought Rob had a great time defensively against Michigan State and against Cassius Winston, an All-American point guard. So I think, his offensive game maybe floundered a bit after his concussion. I don't blame him. I dealt with a concussion this semester. It sucks and completely changes how things in your life go about. It's very weird and very eye-opening from a non-athlete. But that being said, I think his defense definitely improved. You can tell he was much more comfortable in the pack line defense, and I thought he genuinely improved. Also, I thought Juwan genuinely improved. I think it was just harder for him to get baskets later on in the season because he was getting doubled all the time because Justin Smith couldn't hit an outside shot. and the floor spacing was whack. I think if we had had correct floor spacing, somebody like Jerome Hunter to put in who could hit down shots, I think we would have seen Juwan improve over the year and become that senior leader we all thought he was going to be.
Now, just to touch on Finney real quick, I completely agree he's a great defender. But remember, in the non-conference part of the season, he shut down Marcus Howard.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like he was a great defender at the end of the season. All right, fine. But what else, right? Who really stood out? And Noah, you can even jump in here if you like. To me, I can't think of one, and maybe I'm wrong, of a guy who really improved at the end of the season compared to at the start.
I think in this category, it's undecided TBD, because really you can only talk about player development after he's developed a player for over a couple of years. And I think as much as you want to talk about even the rising junior class, the class that's had him with 33 years, with someone like Justin Smith and Al Durham, those aren't even his players. So I think really you can you have to just go on the first recruiting class that he had that are now sophomores. So really he's only had 1 year of player development, and which is just only some of the freshmen, with more or less Rob Finney with some other injuries and stuff. So I think just it's a big question mark, and we're going to have to see after this year.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I'm gonna pay extra attention to it, because next year, if I see a lot of plateauing, a lot of just treading water, I'm gonna be disappointed, in all honesty.
Coach Tonsoni brought up a good point in the chat. Devontae Green got better as the season went on, and I'd argue that, and I guess he had a bit of a handicap in this, but Deron Davis got better as the season went on as well. But I think it's more of the fact that Deron was getting back into shape off of his injury.
The one thing I will say as far as this goes, though, is that it's a team effort. I mean, it really does take a village as far as a Big Ten basketball program goes. Maybe Archie could have done it by himself at Dayton, but when you come to this conference where, even the 10th, 11th, 12th place teams are very competitive, you not only need to be a great player development person as a head coach, you've got to have assistants, you've got to have managers, you got to have everything that assists in improving guys from start to finish. And that's going to be something we focus on here with this assistant coach opening that's made itself come available in the last week or so.
Stole the words right out of my mouth, sir.
It's also hard to develop a player when they're injured for part of the year, because it halts everything too. So I think that's just a big question mark for Archie, and that's something to see this year, if not even the next 2 or 3 years, for his specific evaluation as of now. All right, general confidence with us and Archie. I think that's just going to be us and talking about wrapping up with just, is Archie the right guy for the job? And I think overall you'd both agree I think almost everyone would agree that it's undecided. So I think a lot of us are going to turn to I haven't decided yet, but let's give him some time. So I, of course, put some statistics and some data together on how other coaches throughout history of basketball have started out and become great coaches. So Thomas on Twitter said not to mention Jay Wright and Tony Bennett as examples of when we're doing all of this, because they're very, very different programs. Basically how Indiana has a lot more perks compared to Villanova and Virginia coming into the program. And yes, I agree with that statement to an extent. He's right. But then there's the argument that Indiana hasn't been the blue blood program that we've always wanted the past few years. And it's, at the moment, that's a conversation for another podcast. But speaking of that, Crimson Cast did touch on that, by the way, on a recent episode. So if you want to hear their thoughts on if Indiana currently, right now, is a blue blood program, go check that out. But I still think it's worth mentioning Jay Wright and Tony Bennett as coaches who started out rough and then became national championship winners. So Jay Wright, after his first 3 seasons, I'm going to give coaches that had 2 or 3 seasons. Jay Wright, first 3 seasons, 52-46, so a 53% winning record. 24-8 in his 4th season, made the NCAA tournament. Great example. Tony Bennett, probably the biggest example we're ever going to give, just because he was a coach that started out poorly, got great, won a tournament, and he has the pack line defense. Tony Bennett, even 500 after 2 seasons, 31-31. His 3rd season, 22-10, made the NCAA tournament. Great. Go all the way back to the one and only Dean Smith, 35-27, .565 record in his first 3 seasons. Dean Smith had a little bit of struggles his first 3 seasons. Gary Williams at Maryland, 61-57, .517 his first 4 seasons. And remember, yes, Gary Williams did win an NCAA title. ... Sorry. Tom Izzo, 33-28, .541 in his first 2 seasons. Tom Izzo, another Big Ten, well, now former Big Ten. John Beilein, 46-53, .465 in his first 3 seasons, under 500. Billy Donovan, 27-32, .458 in his first 2 seasons. The biggest one, I think, to top all of this off, that is a close comparison. And again, this was a very, very, very long time ago. I say that hoping that I don't offend some of the older folks like Brian Tonzelli. But the Coach Krzyzewski, Coach K, year 1, Coach K went 17-13. Year 2, 10-17. Year 3, 11-17. He was 38-47, .447. He was 38-47 in his first 3 seasons at Duke. I don't think I need to give any statistics to back up what Coach K has done since then.
Yeah.
So to go for my overall point that I think you guys will mostly agree on is we need to give Archie some more time. There are a lot of coaches that I just listed off that have been extremely successful after not living up to expectations in the first 2 or 3 seasons. So just big question mark, and let's just wait to see what he's going to do. Kick it over to Matt.
Absolutely. Give him more time. Look, I don't have the greatest outlook for next season as far as record goes. I do think it's going to be interesting. There's a lot of question marks. And recently the question marks with IU basketball have gone the other way than we've hoped. And so with that in mind, I'm not as high on next season as maybe some other people are. But I think the key is to give him time. And I believe that the Hoosiers will find a way to get back to national relevancy and get back to being that blue blood and that consistent blue blood that we've always been. We are nationally relevant. We're 5th in revenue as far as and college basketball goes. We have one of the most followed Twitter accounts, most followed Instagram accounts. We have a lot of fans. We have a lot of following. It's just time for the wins and losses to get there. And I think Archie Miller will bring that in the next coming years. Maybe not directly next year, which will irk some people, but I think in next 2, 3, 4 years down the line, we're going to see a consistent winning basketball program.
Yeah. Noah, what was the name of that person who commented that sort of started off this portion? Tom, right? I wasn't sure if it was like Tony or Toby or
Thomas.
I think it was a T. So Thomas, I do really like the point that he made, because here's the deal. Tony Bennett is on one side. Tony Bennett is the blueprint for the pack line defense. His dad essentially sort of popularized it. The fact of the matter is, though, IU is the 3rd most valuable college basketball program when you look at numbers that Forbes put out recently. They're right up there with Louisville and Kentucky. And I'm not saying you've got to have the sort of every year national championship level of attainment that Louisville and Kentucky have. But, ideally, you've got a coach who brings over Tony Bennett's principles and executes them with a program that has an incredible amount of resources and unbelievable facilities. I want to comment. I want to bring up something that college basketball writer Matt Norlander wrote when IU hired Archie Miller. This was not a lukewarm pick. A lot of people who follow college basketball on a regular basis loved this move for IU. He mentioned IU had a solid group of candidates to choose from. Miller is as fine a hire as any realistic candidate. I think he'll go to Final Fours, that's plural, with the Hoosiers. I think Indiana is about to challenge Tom Izzo in the late autumn of his coaching career for hierarchy atop the Big Ten for the next 5 to 7 seasons. He called it a slam dunk move. So that's the bar, okay? It's not, running around the hamster wheel, going nowhere, and just missing out on the NCAA tournament. We know what Archie Miller is capable of. It's going to be a matter of time before we figure out exactly if he can reach that or not.
Right.
Yep.
And it's all about player development and how comfortable the players become in his system. Of course, he might go towards the player development side coming up here with this new assistant coaching hire since Ed Schilling decided to leave. Adios, Ed. We're going to miss you. But, hopefully we fill him with somebody who can help out Archie and the staff with that and be a team player. I'm really excited for the upcoming years. I'm just afraid of how the fan base is going to take next year if next year goes south. And I think we talked about this. We were supposed to talk about this in tangibles, but just the fan base has been toxic, for a lack of better words, about the growing pains. I think I saw a question that was on Twitter about do we believe this is an actual complete rebuild? And I would say yes, this is a complete rebuild because yes, while we have decent players and while you can look at the recruiting rankings, they're 3 stars and 4 stars, they were brought in to play a completely different system. They were brought in to play a fast-paced Tom Crean system. That is not what an Archie Miller system is. And so having to change their games, having to change their mindset, having to, get used to a new head coach has been challenging, to say the least, for some of these guys. And some of them are going into their 3rd year with Coach Miller. And hopefully they grow with his system and grow within his system. But if they don't, we're adding more guys. And I think we got to wait to give Archie the full pressure of what it is to be an IU basketball coach until he brings in all of his guys. Once he has a team of all the guys he's recruited, all the guys he's been planning for, the positions that they play, the skill sets that they have, once he has a full team of that, then we can fully judge if an Archie Miller team is going to be successful. I will sit here and bet a lot of money that Archie Miller is going to get this program turned around. Look out for a new article on Indiana HQ on it coming out soon, probably by the end of the week. So you'll follow me on Twitter and follow the Hoosier Sound and Indiana HQ on Twitter. They'll post updates about that.
Yeah. So I think to sum everything up, no, the first 2 seasons didn't bring Indiana back to an NCAA tournament appearance again, and that's what's the most disappointing. But in terms going into just the toxic fan base and how everyone expected Archie to bring them back to national relevance in the first year to 2 years, first, I think is unrealistic. But second, there have been a lot of good things that he's done so far, which is what we wanted to make this podcast about, to give him time to show him that he can develop those good things. I think we'll have to listen to Nathan real quick if Nathan thinks he's the right coach, but Matt thinks he's the right coach by the end of it. I think he's the right coach by the end of it. Most of you guys, we put a poll out on Twitter about literally an hour and a half before, not even an hour before we started, and after 2 hours, and it's still going. We just asked you guys, is Archie Miller the right guy for the head coaching position? And only after an hour and a half of the poll being out, over 200 votes, we've got 60% people think that Archie Miller is the right coach for the job. 30% undecided. Only 10% don't think that. So obviously it's hard to see a lot of that negative reaction on Twitter, the vocal minority or the silent majority. But I think at least from that kind of poll, it's nice to see that 90% of people either think he's the right coach or they just want to wait and see, which is what we wanted to talk about on this podcast.
Yeah, I'm going to say, honestly, I'm going to side with the 30% that say undecided. Frankly, I need to see significant improvement in year 3, which is this coming season, in order to have a much clearer opinion of this when we have episode number 100 and whatever it is next July or August. The fact is, I need to see, and I'm not talking so much wins and losses. I'm talking how much more comfortable are these guys playing the pack line defense? How much crisper is the offense in year 3 compared to years 1 and 2? They're more experienced. They're going to play some more easier games next year, and assuming good health, which is always a question mark. I need to see tangible improvement in order for me to be fully committed to Archie Miller. But until then, again, you're here as one of the most, in a program that has some of the highest expectations in college basketball. Maybe some of that's unfair, but he definitely has some room that he can improve the basketball team.
Which is a fair point, and I think that's I love to hear the undecided and why you think it's undecided compared to just people saying no without giving much explanation. Let's quickly go over a couple of questions that we got from you guys because I know it's been a long episode so far. But our first, Tom from Facebook had a few questions on there, and he said his first one was, "What do you think really happened to cause the losing streak that doomed last season?" That's a really that's a question that could take a long time. Do you have a quick summary of that, Matt?
I think it was a combination of injuries. We heard rumors. I don't think any of those are true. I think it's a combination of injuries, guys being cold, and the coaching staff trying to stay with the course when they probably should have started switching things up. And I think they started switching things up after the Minnesota game, and things eventually drastically changed. So I think it's a combination of the coaching staff's had some issues. I believe probably there was at least some issues in the locker room. I'm sure some guys were just upset about losing a bunch, and some injuries and some really badly timed injuries.
Yeah, I just think a perfect storm of stuff. It's really hard for a top 5 power pro conference team to go lose 11 of 12 games. So I think just a perfect storm of things. And I don't want to go too far into it.
I'm just going to add really quickly to that. I thought the Big Ten was an absolute monster last year.
Too.
That's gonna ease up in future seasons.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Matt kind of talked about this already. How much of Fred Glass stated having a serious rebuild is accurate, seeing as he didn't lose any recruits or players transfer coming in. He says after this, I know getting his own players is important, but seems to be more difficult now that the honeymoon is over with no great results to show. And I think to answer that question, we answered it throughout the entire episode. Matt talked about how he thinks it was a serious rebuild, and I agree with it. Maybe not in terms of an NBA team, like you're an NBA championship team and then you go from the best to the worst. Maybe not that far, but they were still in a pretty big rebuild for all the reasons Matt said. And yeah, it's getting harder now that the honeymoon is over. But losing recruits or transfers to players coming in, I'll argue again, we lost Thomas Bryant, OG Anunoby, and James Blackman Jr. after that year. So
yep.
If we miss the tournament again this year, how warm does his seat get? Give a quick answer, everyone. I think he gets warm, but not hot or even scalding hot yet. Matt?
Yeah, I think it gets about as warm as rotting old can of tomato soup. So
interesting. Matt and Nathan?
I think it's as warm as a Chicago December blizzard. The fact of the matter is he signed along for a 7-year deal. It's going to upset a lot of people if he doesn't make the tournament, but I don't think his job is in danger. I just don't.
No, I don't either. Unless he completely fails the next 2 years, I think he gets at least 4 years, if not longer than that. All right. We're going to briefly give like one thing because this is an entire episode. Since this is relatively recent, we talked about Ed Schilling leaving. Frame by Frame Hoops, what are your must-haves for the third IU assistant to replace Schilling, and should it be a former player? I'll quickly go. Of course, the obvious answer is shooting. I think it'd also be nice to have some NBA development, like to get players into the NBA so Archie can start getting those people in, just like Tom Crean was pretty decent at. And should it be a former player? Not if it sacrifices talent in the coaching. If it happens to be a former player, great, but just get the best available. Matt?
I think player development is key and number one. A close second would be a family member of a highly ranked recruit in the class of 2021. So there you go.
Nathan?
Yeah, I'm not pro or anti former IU player. It is what it is. I think you need to try to look into a guy who's got some Big Ten experience, whether it's as a player or as a coach. I think there may have been some, I guess, culture shock or competitiveness shock as far as this past season goes. The Big Ten is tough, and I've said that a few times tonight. It's a guy that kind of knows the rivalries and the battles in the Big Ten. I think would be a valuable addition to this to the staff.
Mm-hmm. And as we were talking, our poll went another 1% towards yes from undecided. So people are thinking that we should at least give Archie Miller more time. But that about wraps it up for our 95th show of the Hoosier Sound. Thank you guys so much for joining us, even on this long episode. We really, really appreciate your support. We will be back next Monday for another edition of the Hoosier Sound Off. If you like those kinds of episodes, the Hoosier Sound Off, give us a rate, comment, tell us what you like, what we could do better. That just goes in general. If you think some of these episodes are too long, too short, you dislike things, give us some feedback. We definitely want to take some constructive criticism. Big thanks to our live audience, of course, as always, for coming out and participating in the chat. If you haven't done so, check it out. Try it once. It's great to get comments from fans just like you to add to the episode. Make sure to stay tuned through updates on Twitter. As we've said, visit our website, Indiana HQ. All the information is right there. Send us your questions so we can get them on our next episode. But most importantly, if you enjoy our show, leave us a review. iTunes or Facebook is the best way. Tell a friend, share our links. Your support, telling people if you enjoy this podcast, where you can find it is really how we get to reach all those passionate IU fans just like yourself. But as always, thank you for listening, Hoosier Nation, and we'll see you next time.
Peace.